It's funny you should mention that, which is just to backtrack when you talked about, like this realization, like, oh, I'm going to die. That realization has never been a problem for me, but I do have a distinct memory of being at my friend's funeral. He got murdered here in the States.
Uh,
I went to his funeral when I was 25. And I distinctly remember them bringing the coffin past on his way out of the church. And I thought, that's going to be me one day. I thought that was pretty fucked. But then when my son was born, I thought, you could kill me now.
yeah.
I'd be all right with it. But I don't want to go because I want to be around for him. But you could kill me now and I'd accept it.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Untapped Potential Podcast with today's guest, Keir Wenham-Flatt. Before we start today's conversation, I want to draw your attention to the Practitioner Needs Analysis Coaching Program. The conversations on my research have shown clearly that 160 highly successful practitioners supporting some of the world's greatest athletes have on one level achieved massive things within high-performance sports and academia. Yet on a much more personal level, many are quietly suffering to maintain the perception of being successful and happy. This is the inconvenient truth sitting just under the surface within our high-performance environments. The cost of this truth ranges from divorce, absent parent, physical or mental illness, all of which contribute to limiting the performance impact we all strive so hard to achieve. The human element has been forgotten, with many top practitioners now finding ways to leave our beloved industry. My research process has spawned the services I now provide to support performance practitioners. Athletes have a vast array of options within their support network to help them thrive, optimize, and activate their full expression. But very little is currently aimed at offering this unique support for performance practitioners. This is where the Practitioner Needs Analysis Coaching Program fills that gap. The Practitioner Needs Analysis allows you to identify what qualities are most important for you to show up in your role, career, and life in your fullest expression. It provides an analysis that highlights the components of your life, giving you clarity what is blocking you, how it's blocking you, and what you need to do to release those blocks. This guides you to tailor your goals and actions away from potential burnout, divorce, or illness, and instead towards one where you thrive as a practitioner and in your personal life. To find out more about the group and one-to-one options Men Behind Sport offers, visit www.menbehindsport.com or email me at richard@menbehindsport.com. Now, to today's guests, and anyone who knows Keir will know that he has some very strong perspectives with regards to performance sport, which is why I wanted to bring his voice to this podcast. Keir has a vast amount of experience as a strength and conditioning coach across many elite environments, most notably in professional rugby. Now, this is not why I've asked Keir to come and talk on this podcast. In this episode, we dive into the non-technical aspects of performance. We discuss some of Keir's struggles in his career, how he's navigated his struggles, and what he sees as the next steps we need to take as practitioners to begin to evolve our environments into ones that begin to utilize our full potential. I'm excited to bring you this conversation because you're going to see a side of Keir that maybe you don't always see if you follow him on social media. If you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on iTunes or Spotify. And by doing this, you'll actively help in spreading this content to the practitioners that need it. So without delaying any more, here's a conversation with Keir Wenham-Flatt. Welcome to this episode and welcome, Keir. Thank you so much for being open to chat through on this podcast.
Pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. Had a good one last time.
Yeah. I'm kind of really excited to have you back because of that conversation. Like, really, it's that was last year, I think now. And just love to dive into some of that and what you offer on, obviously through social media, but you impact so many coaches. What I think you do so well is you speak so authentically and you do it in your way. Now, I'm sure it rubs some people out the wrong way, but I think what's underneath that is an authentic message. And that's what I see anyway. And so I'm looking forward to diving into this and like away from all the technical elements, but looking at the person, sort of yourself, and the non-technical elements behind what it is to be a practitioner and a coach. And so I guess the first, you take a step back a little bit. I mean, most people will know who you are, but just your inner drivers. Like the first question is, what were your inner drivers to get into a career of in pro sport?
Being rejected as an athlete.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I would have been an athlete if I could have been.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I've got like a naturally, I would say, defiant streak. which
Okay.
was, I mean, look at me. I'm not a good athlete. Never, not fast, not big, not strong, not brave, not skillful. All that kind of stuff. And probably, I tell everyone that I never really worked hard until I was 25. And I, I'm many things, but I don't lack self-awareness. And it was obvious by the time I was like 15, 16, never going to make it. And at the time, loving rugby as much as I did, if you offered me the chance to do rugby for a living in some capacity, I would have taken it. So coaching was the next best thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it had, once the writing had been on the wall of, I'm not going to make it, there's a natural tendency when you're a teenage male to think, well, if I just get bigger and stronger, I'm going to make it. And, I realized that the training or training people for a living as a coach kind of brought together those elements, which is you get to do rugby all day long. It's not a real job. It is an academic discipline or an intellectual discipline, and enjoy training.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was the reason.
So common.
Yeah.
Well, the conversation I had, so many coaches have got into it through that way.
Yeah.
How do you think that affected your career? Obviously, your career, what's so interesting about your journey, your career has gone in such a wonderful direction, or multiple directions, which we're going to touch on later. But how do you think that affected your early career in the sense of that drive to break into support? What I remember you saying was like, I'm a failed athlete, and I've heard that so commonly. But do you think that skewed? How did that affect you? Like, did that affect you positively, negatively, like on both, probably?
I'm sure, having gone the route that I went, you probably have more of an inferiority complex and a chip on your shoulder than if you're a 10-year pro and somebody hands you a job to transition out of a playing career. But there's advantages to that, which is I never really got handed a job. And, look at me, I've not been brought in because, oh, fucking hell, that guy's big. Like the boy, he's going to get immediate buy-in. Like I am not walking buy-in, and, I'm not a remarkable athlete and stuff like that. So I would say I think, people talk about like nepotism babies. The more that gets given to you, the less you're forced to engage with reality and get an honest assessment of who you are, how good you are, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That was not an issue for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No. And so along that journey, and I suppose you explained this a few times in different podcasts. And where was your lowest point in your career? Because I think that's from where I am. That has been quite a pivotal in your journey, anyway. Specifically, like you seem, I know you have. You mentioned it, self-awareness. You have got a great deal of self-awareness, and you've responded rather than trying to bash the door down the same thing over and over again. But what was your lowest point in your strength and conditioning career?
I've had a bunch of them, but I mean, when I started at Wasps, this is like 2010. Yeah, 2010. So by no means was I crushing it in 08, 09, early 2010. But I was making, I was gradually making more money as a commercial personal trainer, building out my diary, like all that kind of stuff. And it was a big, at the time, pay cut to go from that, probably like £25,000, whatever. Maybe I make 25K as a personal trainer that year. And then basically to go down to Wasps to work for free. London's a lot more expensive than Northampton. That's a stressor. And it's a bigger stressor, self-imposed, admittedly, that there's nothing waiting for you at the end of the internship. So the risk is not only have I shot myself in the foot financially and walked away from friends, family, whatever, not that those things have been massive things keeping me in. That's a whole nother conversation. But basically, you're like, well, I might be risking all this for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And more then than now, but still too much, is like, what will people think of me when I fail?
Right.
And, you know, I have a distinct memory of, so there was a bunch of shit. Like, I remember when I was at Wasps. Now, they won everything. In the early 2000s, they won everything. But if you worked in the academy at Wasps, you were a second-class citizen. Like, literally, you were not even allowed to walk in the first team gym if you were with the academy. And I arrived there in July, and I had not had like a face-to-face, like honest conversation with the head strength and conditioning coach by Christmas. So I'm like, I want to work here. So I went up to him at the Christmas party and I was like, I've been working in your department basically for the last 5 or 6 months. I emailed you twice in the last 2 years to ask for an internship. Anyway, I got an internship. I'm with the academy now. And he said, oh, I know who you are. And that's one of those things that stuck with me. I will never do that as a boss. Anyway, a few months after that, like, I've got no money coming in, been living above a pub, you know, working like 3 part-time jobs, still not making enough money. And I had a school friend, actually, good friend of mine, and she worked in television at the BBC. I was qualified as a sports masseur then. And she's like, right, you know, I've got an office full of people. She did me a big favor. I've got an office full of people. They're all going to pay X. Come and do massages for everyone. And then you can get some money in that way. And because I had no money, I had to carry this fucking massage table from Acton to White City on the tube, carry it all up there. And I got there and they were like, oh, we need to cancel. So I think I basically netted about 30 quid. And I did cry that day. But what can you do?
Yeah.
I've had other tough times. You know, I spent a lot of time spending 5-6 months on the road in Argentina by myself.
Right.
You know, all that kind of stuff.
That resonates to me in China, you know, just started in the middle of nowhere, which I look back now as fond memories, but at the time, like hard work.
You're in the Exo Survivors group.
Counseling group. I want to go back to that, but before we move on to later experiences, I think what you just highlighted there about the senior, the lead, the figure front of not recognizing who's in the team. And I wonder.
Oh, no, he recognized, he just didn't care.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And where do you think that, and not to pick out this person in general, because I've heard this story quite often, and I think, I guess, relating it to what I've heard, like there's a fear around approaching the figure front. There's this sense of taking whatever the figure front says as well, I need to do that rather than question. There's a fear of reprisal. There's a fear of, Callum Walsh has been on this show, and he was talking about what do you call it? The self-preservation. Like whether people in charge have this self-preservation, or most of the department has got this self-preservation. So which leads to insular thinking, which leads to defending our ways and unable to kind of have an open conversation. I suppose with that lead not caring, did you notice? Because something I'm interested about building connection to a team. Did you notice that? Like, how did that play out with the whole department, like say the academy department, or just to get a bit more context? Because I think some people don't recognize it. So just from your perspective,
there was no belonging.
Right.
Yeah, there was no belonging. You know, now we were separated. I mean, Wasps had no money. You know, even despite the success, there was the main building, and then we used to have a porter cabin for all the academy staff. But, you know, things like that guy emailing my boss to say, oh, you left out, you know, 2 or 3 boxes in the gym after your session. Like, just fucking petty shit like that. Like, you know, just things like that. There was no belonging.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that head left to another job. Never spoken to him since.
Mm.
My boss, I spoke to 2 days ago. I haven't worked for him for 10 years.
Yeah, right.
You know, that's the belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's one of those things which is not that it's anywhere near this level, but you know, they talk about, you know, abusive parents.
Right.
You either perpetuate the cycle or break the cycle.
Yeah.
And definitely, you know, I made a promise to myself when I manage staff, which is, you know, day one, I'm going to greet every intern. I'm going to shake their hand, get to know them. You know, I'm probably buy them a coffee, stuff like that.
Mm.
You know, all that kind of stuff. And literally last week, you know, I went down to Tampa and stayed with a former intern of mine at his house with my son, you know. So I'm happy in a way that happened to me that I can demonstrate once I'm in that situation how it should be done.
Yeah. That's a really good example, and I think again leading to actually connecting with Callum's conversation that we had. And this is a question I'd love to ask you now. His measure of success is, he had to think about it, but his measure of success was like, is he still in contact with ex-colleagues? Is he still, you know, is there a relationship built? His success was based on relationship now, and rather than accolades. And so I kind of ask you that question: what is success to you now?
Exactly the same. Exactly the same. I mean, it's self-serving because obviously,
yeah,
you know, I've never won shit as a strength coach, but you know, things like that, like that guy that I stayed with last weekend, he invited me to his wedding earlier this year. In May, I had a kid who I trained at Wasps when he was 16, 17. I haven't trained him in 10 years. And he came out to stay with me when I was in Tokyo and trained him. And this year he was getting ready for World Cup selection. He said, "Oh, can you help me get ready?" And I haven't trained anyone in 3 years. I haven't worked in rugby in 6. And he still, you know, picked me out. And it's obviously a function of the relationship more than anything else. So, but to get requests like that is very humbling.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think speaks volume to that, like you said, the relationship. And because just so many gauge success based on the objective measures, which obviously they're a part of it, you know, awards or athletes winning something, but a phrase I've heard so often, and paraphrase, is I've supported athletes to reach Olympic success or championship success, and I've waited for the emotional rush to hit. But it hasn't come. I thought this is why we do what we do, and it's just leaving many coaches or star practitioners kind of on this spiral of like, well, why am I doing this if this is not giving me this sense of fulfillment or joy or whatever it is they're looking for? And I think relationships get pushed to the back burner because it's not measurable. Well, it's not
the biggest wins of my career. Yeah, it was relief. That was all I felt was relief.
Okay.
Yeah.
But for security of your job?
No, not even that. I never cared about that. You know, it was probably, like I said, you know, people, everyone's a star of their own movie. So you think, fuck, you know, everyone's watching me. They're waiting for me to fail. And especially, you know, for example, I left Sydney Roosters, and a year and a half later, we put 40 points on the Six Nations champions to get to the semi-finals of the World Cup. And I remember sitting in the change rooms after, and I was just like, fuck, it was a relief. I was happy for about 5 minutes, and then we got back to work.
Yeah, right. Where do you think that relief and that pressure to keep, and again, this paraphrase statement, chasing the thing, chasing the next thing, the next achievement, like where do you think, have you seen that in the coaches in the Strength Coach Network, and where do you think that comes from, just generally?
You know, I think it's a common thing to feel, but I think the reasons or the manifestations of it are different. You know, probably because, you know, everyone's values are different, everyone's choices are different, but, you know, I don't think a significant portion of the coaching population probably have my appetite for risk. And dropping everything, moving across the world, starting again, that kind of shit. So I think it is common. But I think fundamentally, I think relief comes from you think you're going to lose something, and then you don't, and that can be status, money, connection, all that kind of stuff.
It just made me think. One thing you said was around. I'm going to link it back to Roosters and kind of you talked about around threat, and what stood out to me from what we spoke about last time was that there was an element where you felt trapped in that job because you didn't want to fail, kind of like touching on what you just said. The status that job gave you, the money, and you were close to your home. And then you were there for a short period of time, but then you were offered the head of speed, strength, and power of the Roosters. And
2 weeks.
Right.
3 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there was an element you didn't even think of it. You said yes, jumped on it straight away without thinking about what actually that meant. What did that mean? What was the reality of that versus what were you aiming for? Were you looking at just the title, or what other things were you thinking about when you did take that? Or if you can expand on that anymore.
Yeah, same thing again, which is, what are people going to think of you? Because I think you can be very, very cynical, but there's a book called The Status Game.
Right.
It's all just status.
Yeah.
Everything is status games. Some people use money as a proxy for status, because guess what? The richer you are, the more attractive women you get to pick from. That's a fact. It's job title, it's achievement, all that kind of stuff. And, for sure, if you have this chip on your shoulder where you've had low self-esteem your whole life, you've been rejected as an athlete, it took you 2 years to work for free, the head strength coach at Wasps doesn't know, knows your name, doesn't care to speak to you for the first 6 months. And then 3.5 years later, you're at a higher level job at a higher status club than him. That's one of those. I'm sure that guy's never even looked me up since. But in my, in the narrative he tells us, he's like, they're all watching. This is going to fucking show them.
Right.
Yeah. No. And, would, knowing what I know now, how it was, would I still make that deal? Or have an idyllic life as the under-20s coach and stay in that job for the next 10 years and not have any of the things that I had in the last 10 years? I'd still make that bet. Maybe that's a 4. Yeah.
I think what you said earlier, actually, talking about risk, like not many have the same level of tolerance for risk for you. I guess how I see it, and from the conversation we had last time, it seems that you're just clearer. I think you're clear of what you do, what you're aiming for, and what you're not happy to put up with. And I mean, in a way, like you've got a clear idea of what sacrifice you are willing to make and for how long you're willing to make that. Because if I'm correct, like you left that, you did some form of calculation on your own and at Roosters and think this is not going anywhere for me.
Well, it was when I caught myself doing the sums,
right?
And I was like, well, this is a bad sign,
right?
The way what you just phrased, actually, it was phrased to me by David Joyce in a job interview, which is, why is it whenever you don't get your way, you leave? Which I don't think was very fair.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think, and going back to low self-esteem as well, when you enter that job, there was sports psychs that put everyone through this battery of tests, and you sky really high on high drive to self-improve and just self-awareness. Yet you're
opposite ends.
Right. Yeah. Where, and I say this because this is one thing that I'm hearing about so much low self-esteem. It affected me greatly. To the point where when I was at the IS, I've given this example before, like I found it so hard to give my coaching rationale. Like I just thought, what if I say the wrong thing? I'm going to look stupid.
But here's the thing.
Right.
At that point, I would have cut my dick off to have your job. If you said you and me could trade places, I'd be like, give me it. That's the thing. I don't think I ever told you that, but yeah, at the time I was like, fucking hell, this guy's crushing it. EIS, Harlequins, like all this kind of stuff. I would have swapped.
The reality of it is so different, isn't it? Amazing. The perception of what you see.
Of course.
Versus
you see the highlight reel,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I wonder, you're the one that kind of first said at the beginning, before we recorded, the idea of the achievement feedback loop, and it's so potent, and I think it's so insidious that this high drive, I'll quote you, having a high drive to self-improve that's fueled by rock bottom self-esteem can take you very far in your career, because you're coupling a sense of inferiority with a relentless pursuit of achievement. And I hear that, I've heard that so much. One, it was for me as well, my own experience, but two, it's this constant, it's so common to hear that. And I wonder, like, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on that? From the coaches you've kind of mentored or led in the Strength Coaching Network to the coaches you've worked with at universities and, all around, like, what have you noticed with that?
You like rainbows, don't complain when you get wet.
Yeah.
I am not putting myself in this category, but there's a new biography coming out about Elon Musk, same guy that it was. His name's Walter Isaacson. He also did the Steve Jobs biography, and he's obviously doing the press junkets and stuff like that right now. Mm-hmm. And he was on the Lex Fridman podcast, and he did say, it's one of these things that you see that all these great people have their demons, mm-hmm. and that's the fuel. Mm-hmm. But there's a cost to having that fuel. Yeah. And, I think there's a trade-off. But, the exact words that he used in the podcast is, this guy is addicted to drama. He is allergic to contentment, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And there's a spectrum. There are some people that are just very content, very happy, not chasing any kind of external achievement or goals. Mm-hmm. And then there's the Elon Musks of the world. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a psychological, emotional, social price to be paid the further you go this way. And there's an economic and there's a status price to be paid as you go this way. Mm. And where you sit on that is going to be a product of your upbringing, your experiences, and your personal values. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, kind of again, like on your, like, from now, where I see now, and like, you seem to, I think what stands out about you, about everything you do, is that you lead with an authentic message. You're leading with what you see as a truth, mm-hmm. which shows to me that you are. And you tell me if I'm wrong, but you seem very grounded in yourself now. Like your self-esteem, seems like you've really worked on that. And what things have worked for you to build your self-esteem?
Having a kid.
Right.
Yeah. Basically, having a kid, getting married.
Right.
That kind of stuff. And, there's, if you see the movie enough times, you know how the movie ends. Mm-hmm. And, if you get everything that you ask for professionally, I wrote it down. By the age of 30, I'm going to be a head strength coach in the Premiership. And at 28, I got that job at the Roosters. Mm-hmm. At 29, I was at the World Cup, and I turned 30 when we played New Zealand at Wembley. Still miserable. Okay, let's go to Japan. Still miserable. Okay, let's go to America. Mm. I think 3 times is enough to realize, this is probably not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that, and then probably got painted into a corner a little bit with not seeing my son for a year during COVID as a result of splitting from his mother. Yeah. It just happened that he was in Japan when COVID hit. They shut the borders for a year. Didn't see him for 11 months basically. And I was probably forced to accept the reality that I can continue on the path that I'm going. And it's one of these things about my career, which is, any success I achieved, I expected it. It was never a question of if I would make it. It was when am I going to make it? So I was like, right, I can continue on this path and I'll probably get to the NFL eventually. Mm-hmm. At the expense of being a good parent or I can walk away and be a good parent. And financially, it probably made sense months to go before I did. For family reasons, it made sense to go months before I did. But honestly, even at that point in 2020, what will people think of me when I leave coaching? I said I was going to do this. People are going to say that I failed. And I think it just, it comes down to those that would judge me for that. I don't care what they think of me. And the people that matter would not judge me for that. So what does it matter? It's just, you can bleep out the word, but taking LSD,
yeah, right,
my green card, taking acid and stuff like that is, I remember distinctly coming to the realization that me is just a story that I tell myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm in charge of that story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I think that's the potent use of changing state. Now, there are many different ways of doing that. And, I think there is wise to get support within that kind of area. You look in that, in my experience anyway, but I think the story we're told, we need to be married by this age. We need to get this type of job. We need to earn this type of money. We need to live in this type of house. I think, for me as well, that has been such a loud wake up call. Like, we are in charge of our own story of how we want to be and how we want to live.
My favorite quote about that, where you talk about states. Right. So there's, I'm not a religious person, but there's a book by Sam Harris. I don't know if you read it. It's called Waking Up. It's called.
I've heard of it. I've not read it.
Spirituality in the Absence of Religion. And what he talks about, which is, when you're an atheist or you're a scientifically minded person, you can fall into the trap of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, which is religion has nothing to offer the world.
Right.
And when you look at what unites all of the great religions of the world, it's transcendence.
Yeah.
So it's effectively what Buddhists would call the recognition that the self is an illusion.
Yeah.
And it talks about how, prayer, meditation, religious observance, fasting, these are all ways to change your psychological state to get to that realization. And he said, with enough practice, prayer and meditation is like being given the ability to look through the keyhole into a secret garden. And he said, if you take psychedelics, it's like being thrown over the wall.
Whether you like it or not. Yeah,
exactly. You're going to realize.
Yeah, for me personally, a spiritual faith has been massive since losing my mum. And it wasn't a choice. Seeing my parents die, or my mum, both my dad and mum, but for whatever reason, my mum at that time, I was more maybe aware of it. Like, shit, I'm gonna die one day. What does that mean? And not that I've got any answers, but but anyway, transcendence. Kind of, do you practice meditation or any way? What practice do you?
No. My mind is too active. So I mean, the closest I come is jiu-jitsu, just because you're not able to think about anything else. If you think about something else, you're going to get strangled. So that's as close as I come. It's funny you should mention that, which is just to backtrack when you talked about like this realization, like, I'm going to die. That realization has never been a problem for me, but I do have a distinct memory of being at my friend's funeral. He got murdered here in the States. I went to his funeral when I was 25, and I distinctly remember them bringing the coffin past on his way out of the church, and I thought, that's going to be me one day. I thought that was pretty fucked. But then when my son was born, I thought, you could kill me now. I'd be all right with it, but I don't want to go because I want to be around for him, but you could kill me now and I'd accept it. Yeah.
How did you deal with the grief of that? I say that because from what I'm looking at, I've spoken to a lot of psychologists and psychotherapists as well, and one, my own journey of that, my own personal treatment of that, but two, with regards to what I'm doing here at Mind Sport, and just to make sure I'm staying in my tracks. So, and two, just get that perspective. And, from what I see and what I've heard is that men in general, of course, this is through the lens of sport, I see this, but I think men in general, are just not either taught or not equipped or haven't been guided in a way to truly embrace the expansive emotions that we feel. And so that's one of my question is like, how do you deal with grief? How do you deal with grief?
Right. It's a societal trap because women will generally, oh, it sucks that men aren't in touch with their feelings. They need to communicate better. They need to be more in touch with their feelings. And then the second you show any kind of vulnerability or in touch with your feelings, you're a pussy. Women generally want to be protected. And the like archetype of the protector and the provider is not this guy that's sitting around thinking about his feelings and how do I feel about this? They, again, the stereotype, the archetype, which is they don't feel it because they're not bothered by it and they're too busy providing and protecting for it to be an issue. Yeah. So you get on with it.
In my experience, I think that's why losing my mum was so massive for me. I'd done all that. I buried all that when my dad died when I was 16. And I remember being told literally by someone, big boys don't cry. You got to think of good times. You got to pick yourself up, you got to carry on. And I bought into that totally. And the elements where I kind of agree with you in a sense of life has to continue. Life does continue. Life will continue when I die. And I had so much repressed anger, so much like from my childhood, but also from that moment, like I just had nothing, which then began to surface when I was 20 and just got me in a whole load of trouble. And so my lived experience from learning how to feel my emotions, not to wallow in it. And what I mean by wallow it, not to be in it when I feel them and allow them to pass. And I'm grateful for my wife now who is very open to that. And so anyway, my lived experience is that the freedom that I have got from being able to do that has blown me away. Like to decharge or to diffuse the anger, because the emotion has been able to pass through and I but yeah, whereas pre 2014, pre 2010, and part like I was very angry, like you never know it. Oh, Richie's so nice, he's smiling. This mask was on until some buttons were pushed, and then that would be it. And it, like I said, got me into a whole load of trouble. And I wonder, again, in bringing back to sporting environments, I wonder how so much of that repression, and again, this is just my perspective from what I'm hearing, but like the fear of coming, the idea of saying no, I think we touched on it, the idea of saying no, or the idea of standing what someone believes in, and within the work environment, there's so much fear of reprisal, fear of coming across as weak, fear of coming across as, like a pussy, I suppose, which I think, from what I've heard, massive in professional football. That's not the only sport, but I think football is particularly dark. But I think that repressed male archetype seems to me anyway be sort of running through lots of sport as well. And I don't know, that's just my perspective on it. And
I agree. It's I'm still working on it. I'm still working on it.
I think someone, I mean, again, looking to sport, someone who I've become friends with, actually, I'm grateful, Craig White. And
very successful guy.
Yeah, very. And then his I guess his passion is men without masks. And he's had a lot of ex-rugby players, like rugby coaches coming into him to unstick a lot of that. And I think there's one of the goals of this podcast, and one of the goals of Men Behind Sport, is to bring awareness that there is a different way to be, and it is a work in progress. For me, it's a work in progress still. But I think I'm talking about self-awareness, like, well, what's showing up in my life? How am I reacting to things versus how am I can I respond to this in a different way? And I know that I'm a better father and a better partner, better husband, and a better friend, and just a general better human when I am allowing myself to feel things. And there are times, of course, I still get lost in my stuff, but that's where, say, coming back to psychedelics, breath work, meditation, certain sports that kind of get me out, exactly how you describe, get me out of head. Like I know it as Flow, amazing work at Flow Genome Project, which I'll put everything we mentioned, I'll put it down there. Like the purposeful practice of changing state. Now, there's so many different triggers to that, but like action sports or I guess martial arts, like whereas jiu-jitsu, high element of risk, and which kind of requires you to focus, kind of what you said. But I think there's so much value in learning to change our state. And yeah.
It's funny you mentioned your wife. That's for me. It sounds bad, but she's probably one of the first partners I've had that I've admired.
Right.
Because I think as well, there's like this male archetype where maybe not everyone, maybe just me, it was a flaw, but being transactional with women and objectifying women a little bit. But what I admire most about my wife is that she chose to be happy. She just like, I wasn't happy, so I decided to be happy. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And just I think she's walked away from a number of jobs because she just like, well, this is not making me happy, and she just walked away and chose to be happy. I think that was when I made the decision that I wanted to be married to her was, oh, you can admire the person that you're with.
Yeah. I would echo that for my wife. I think what you always sounds like, I've never spoken to or met her, but just that says to me a very strong woman to know what she wants and
we are so different. I'm named after the founder of the Labour Party, so Keir Starmer's obviously he's named after the same guy. Left leaning, all this kind of stuff, and she is a Republican libertarian gun nut, from California. But yeah, that's, I think, when we tell people, oh, we're married to one another, it's like, well, we actually agree on all the stuff that matters. To me and her, that's like superficial shit. It doesn't matter.
And again, my when I was saying about my emotions and freeing myself, like not one moment is that easy. Even now with my wife, who is she's a yoga teacher, she's kind of super like that, chooses to be happy, chooses to just exude it. It's still a massive challenge to open up in those kind of ways. And I think it's a learned skill. That's what I guess coming with that down to, it's a learned skill rather than when to do it, when not to do it, how to do it, kind of what's the right way for me to do it. And but kind of your one thing that stands out from what you just said, and this links to a few other coaches that I've spoken to who are actually successful in sport, not just successful, I mean successful in the sense of happiness, is they got a solid, strong relationship there, whether it's a wife or partner, whatever, because it anchors them into real life. And I in particularly, say, for example, in sport, the ones I've spoken to, one, the wife doesn't care what they do. Yes, they've got an interest in how the job goes well and that they're happy, but they don't care about, they don't care you work in professional sport. It doesn't get me going. That's not what I'm drawn to. And two, just it's this reality check that when they do get home, well, okay, you've done this, right? Focus on family time. Like if they've got kids or they make a conscious, in fact, linking back to the Flow Genome project, kind of the idea of just baking in each week, there's purposeful date nights. It's easy to, I'm
going on a date on Sunday.
There you go. Right. The importance of that, I think, the importance of making sure it happens, because you could easily say it, but time just drifts away. And coming back to something else you said in our last conversation, and I think that stood out to me so much, is you talked about